Hi, I'm Kathy Dodson, your pandemic potter from Sally Jones Pottery here in Montreat. And today we're going to have a tutorial for making the one-piece nativity scenes. And they're a really versatile thing that you can make. You can make it with the Mary and Joseph and the Christ child. You can make it with the three wise men and the Christ child with their gifts. You can do the shepherds and sheep. You could even do it for the members of your family. And so it's a really versatile thing to make. The first consideration you need to have is how big you want it to be. This one is probably on the outer limits of size that I would consider. It's about 6 inches tall and 6 inches wide. Although the base is quite narrow, which is an advantage, so that it'll fit lots of different places. You could sit it on a mantle or on a windowsill. This one has a much wider base, which is it's about 6 by 4, and but it's much. The figures are only about 3.5 inches tall. The nice thing about not having tall figures is that they don't have to be braced as they're drying to stand up. Because they're multiple figures, they're overlapped, and they can sort of curve and support one another, which is sort of a nice thing in life too. You can see that he sort of has a little wave and a curve to hold them up. So the first thing you want to think about is what size base you want, and I kind of favor a freeform base, and you can have a rectangular one, a square one, a round one. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference. You do need a few tools, and I will assume you've already picked up a slab of clay. You need some chopsticks, or bamboo skewer, which is a really handy cutting tool, a dull pencil, something to smooth with, and it can be a tongue depressor or a credit card works just fine. Your finger is really the best smoothing tool that you have, but you can also, this is a disposable baby spoon, plastic cutlery works well. So just play around and see what you can find around your house. The same thing goes for texture tools. These are scraps of lace and burlap, which give a nice texture. You can also just use your pencil and make some lines or marks on your clay, which give a nice interest and a place for the glaze to pool. This box lid just has some parallel lines. And so I like to keep a small pan of water nearby so that I can rinse my hands off, and a towel, which is handy, or a cloth that you can clean your hands off in case you need to stop and answer the phone or take a break. Clay is a messy operation, and it's a good thing to have some plastic. I have an old shower curtain covering my table, but it's also nice to have some cardboard or newspaper or some other kind of paper to put under your clay so that it doesn't stick to your work surface. So I've cut out a base here, and I've put some marks on there just with my pencil, just to create a little bit of interest. Now, a lot of your texture disappears as you start to put your piece together, but you can also always go back in and reapply it. So I think today I'm going to make a Mary and Joseph, and I don't want them to be much more than 3 or 3.5 inches. Clay shrinks a little less than 20%, so your piece will look smaller when it comes out of the bisque firing. But so I'm going to start with about 4 inches, and I'm going to cut them with my skewer in sort of a rough triangular shape. And I've pressed with my burlap onto this before I cut it, and some of it has disappeared, so I'm going to press just a little bit more. The slab that you picked up was probably about 3/8 of an inch thick, and so that gives a little bit of leeway for thinning as you press your textures on there. You want to make sure to take your finger and smooth the cut edges before you go much farther. And if your clay is really sticky like this one is, if you leave it out for a couple of hours, or just even a short time in the sun, it will dry out enough so that it's a little bit easier to keep its shape. You don't really ever want to add water to your clay. When you get it, it has plenty of moisture in it, and adding additional water weakens the structure of the clay. So you really don't want to add any water. Anytime you put two pieces of clay together, you need to use a couple of things. One is slip, and the other is scoring. And so I'm going to take my pointed skewer, and I'm just going to make some little hatch marks on the bottom of my figure. Let's call this one Joseph. Don't you think it looks a little like Joseph? And then on my base, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to think about where I want Joseph to stand, and so I'm going to make a sort of a curved place with my hatch marks for Joseph to stand. And I'm going to take my slip, and I'm using a small paintbrush to apply a little bit of slip, but you can also easily use a chopstick or a skewer, which will work just fine. And I'm just going to apply a little bit. Like glue, you don't want so much that it oozes out and is too visible. So once I've got a little bit of slip on the bottom of my figure, I'm going to press it in place and curve it just a little bit. And I think I'm going to take a little piece of scrap and roll it into that most basic and fun form of forms to make a snake. And I'm going to take that snake and press it to the back of my figure to give it a little bit more stability. And you can take a smoothing tool and just smooth the edges. There's probably enough slip that oozed out from your joining to make that stay put. So take a minute and smooth out your snake along the back to give your first figure a little stability. And now let's make Mary out of another triangle. And Mary's a little bit shorter than Joseph. I have any definite scripture references to back that up. I'm just making an assumption. Now, I'm going to smooth the edges a little bit. And Mary and Joseph seem to have pointed heads, which I'm fairly certain they did not. So I'm going to lop off just the tip of those triangles a little bit. And once again, I'm going to take my bamboo skewer and make some hatch marks. And then I'm going to make some hatch marks on my base right in front of, and to the side of Joseph. If you can see there, where Mary will stand. And apply a little bit of slip to the bottom of that figure. And so I'm going to press her down, and she's just a little in front of Joseph. And because they're not but 3 or 4 inches tall, I don't need to curve them too much, but you can if you want to make them appear to be leaning forward slightly to gaze down at the infant. So I have a little bit of my snake left that I'm going to apply at the back of my second figure to give her a little support. And just kind of blend it in with your base. And you can go back and refine that a little bit more This clay is a little sticky because it's been very humid the last few days. So I may let this sit for a few hours and then come back and fine tune it. Now, if you'll take a couple of small pieces of scrap clay, and you can see that these guys have just these little ball heads, and so go ahead and make it can be a ball, it can be an oval, whatever pleases you. And I kind of like, excuse me, I kind of like to have a little bit above. These are right at the top of the figures, and I kind of like to have the faces a little bit lower than the very top, so that it can be a little bit of the top of the, like their robe can come down just a little bit. So I'm doing this backwards. I hope that looks okay. And press it lightly, and you lose a little bit of the ball shape, so it's a little flattened. And then you can kind of curve the hat down. Now this is going to make your figure a little bit top heavy, so that's where it comes in handy to have the two overlapped and sort of curved to brace one another. If your piece looks like it's flopping over, you can always take your bamboo skewer and sort of anchor it, and I have done this many times, so that and prop them up a little bit until they're dry enough to stand on their own. There's so many metaphors in there you could think about. Okay, so there's Joseph with a face and Mary. So let's always remember when you're joining two pieces of clay together to give them a little texture and a little slip, so that the two clays can fuse together when they're fired. So there's Mary. I'm going to tip her hat down just a little bit, and I'm going to leave those for just a minute, and I'm going to make a little manger. Now, in both of these, it's just a suggestion of a baby. This one just looks like maybe he's completely swaddled up. This one has a little blanket with a little head peeking out. It's also kind of nice to make something like a manger. And so I think I'm just going to take a little ball of clay and flatten it so that I've got sort of a little oval bowl shape that can hold the blanket and the baby. Seems a little more civilized than just having him lying on the stable floor like that. Again, I don't have a lot of specific information. I'm sure at some point it may have lain on the stable floor, but maybe not for long. So smooth your edges and make a sort of a rough, not real sure what the manger looked like, but you don't want it too cumbersome and too thick, but you also don't want to have thin, rough edges. So I'm hoping he'll fit down there. That's pretty big. Okay, so I'm going to tap the bottom a little bit to flatten it sort of, and then I'm going to take another little piece of clay and make sort of a little peanut shape that can become the swaddled baby Jesus. And you can give it more definition as you like, but I'm going to put a little bit of slip, score the manger just a little bit. Maybe the pointed end would be more efficient. So there's my little baby peanut Jesus. That's so irreverent. I'm sorry. Okay, now we've got little starting to look like baby Jesus, and we'll score the bottom of the manger and give it a little place to stand in front of Mom and Dad. Give it a little bit of slip, and we're going to place him right there on the base. And you can sort of fine-tune your stable and the features on the Christ child, or you can make them just really abstract, so that I don't think there's a doubt of who you're looking at when you see this. Another thing you can add is that's kind of fun, is a little sheep, and a sheep looks just like can be just a very small sheep. I don't doubt that they weren't able to evict all of the animals from the manger. I'm sure that some of the smaller animals hung around, and you can take your skewer and make some little curlicues in your sheep. As I said, this clay is a little wet, and so it'll be easier to make marks in when I have let it dry out just a little bit. So I'm going to take my little, I don't even know what that is. It's just a little quail egg. And then I'm going to make a little tiny little egg shape and score the top and score the underside of my little egg and put a little bit of slip on there, and it's a sheep. And this sheep is resting, so he's going to have his legs all curled up under him. And I think he'll fit right over here where he might be coming to adore the baby Jesus. So there's a little sheep and Mary and Joseph. And you can add some more texture once you've got your piece assembled. You want the base to be fairly flat, and just go back and really spend some time smoothing the edges. And as I say, if you want to leave it out for a couple of hours and come back to it when it's not quite so soft, and it's had a chance to dry out just a little bit, smooth your seams where you supported it in the back. And you can stand Mary and Joseph up just a little bit, or you can lean them over to look at the Christ child. And the next thing you want to do, once it gets a little bit drier, is to flip it over and make sure that your initials are, and the date or Montreat, whatever else, make sure that it's something that will easily identify you. Everyone thinks that their piece will be unique and that there will be no difficulty identifying it when it comes out of the kiln. And surprisingly, a lot of pieces look very, very similar, and a lot of initials are similar. So if you have unless your initials are Z or Q, make sure there's some identifying mark, maybe your middle initial or your full name, whatever you can fit. There's plenty of room to write on the bottom of this piece. So be sure that you do that, and think about what you would like for it to look like when it's glazed. This blue that has some brown undertones is one of my favorites. It's called EMU, and it's like you glazed it in brown and then dipped it in blue, but it almost always comes out beautifully. This one looks like it was, I'm not real sure, it has multiple things, but it's had white dripped on it. You might opt just to dip it in iron oxide, and then you don't have to glaze it at all. You can also dip it in iron oxide and then clear, which is a nice finish. We've got white, Montreat blue, denim blue, which is a matte finish. It's the only matte glaze that we have. We have nutmeg, which is a brown, and we've also got plum, which is a purple. So, and there's also a light yellow. So a couple of blues, a brown, a white, and a black. So think about what you would like your piece to look like, and you should have enough clay to make at least one other um, uh, little nativity set or shepherd or wise men or family scene. But they're kind of fun. And think about your texture, and be sure and smooth your surfaces and your edges, and take it back to Sally Jones Pottery by 11 o'clock on Wednesday. And I hope you have a good time.